You ever live so long out in the middle of nowhere that your bones know trouble before your eyes do? See, out here in West Texas, you don't knock on a man's gate at dawn, and you damn sure don't sneak past it in a white van with no plates. But at 5:14 a.m., three men tried exactly that. They thought I'd panic. They thought I'd call 911. Instead, I shut the gate, racked my shotgun, and welcomed them properly. I've lived out here by myself for 15 years now, and you learn things you never learned in town. You learn the weight of silence. You learn how the wind sounds different when something doesn't belong. And you learn that trouble out here moves quiet. Most mornings on my ranch start simple: coffee, sunrise, the soft clatter of cattle settling in the distance. But that morning didn't start with coffee. It started with three sharp buzzes from the phone on my nightstand. Motion alert, East Gate. Now, the East Gate sits at the far edge of my property, low ground, close to the dry creek bed. Nobody goes through it unless they're invited. Nobody. The room was still black, not even a hint of dawn. But my dogs, two retired canine shepherds, were already awake. They weren't barking. Trained dogs don't bark unless they're told. They were sitting up, ears forward, bodies stiff, waiting. So, whatever was out there, they sensed it. But my bones sensed it first. I tapped the alert on my phone. The infrared feed flickered, then steadied. A white Ford Transit van was crawling up my private road with its headlights off. Slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. No plates, no county markings. Just one cheap decal slapped on the side: Community Inspection Patrol. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Not law enforcement, not maintenance, not welcome. The van eased past my cattle fence and rolled to a stop near my equipment shed, like it was checking into a motel. Then the doors swung open. Three men stepped out. Two white, one Latino. All dressed in mismatched tactical vests and cargo pants. The kind you buy online when you want to look official, but don't have anyone willing to certify you. One wore sunglasses, even though it was still pitch dark. Another held a clipboard, always a bad sign at any hour. The third started snapping photos of my barn like he was appraising it. I felt my jaw tighten. I slid out of bed, pulled on my boots, still unlaced, and stepped into the garage, the cold morning air hitting my face like a slap. I grabbed my radio, my remote gate controller, and my Glock 19. Didn't draw it, just clipped it to my belt. Years in the Corps teach you one rule: if you pull a weapon, you better damn sure plan to use it. I fired up the ATV. The engine coughed once, then growled awake. Gravel spat from the tires as I drove toward the shed. As I crested the rise, my automatic floodlights snapped on, washing the trespassers in pale yellow. And they didn't flinch. Not a blink, not a twitch. That alone told me two kinds of men stand on another man's land before dawn without being startled: idiots, or people who think they're untouchable. I let the ATV idle down to silence, stepped off, planted my boots in the gravel, and spoke up. Calm, steady, the way you talk when you know the land under your feet is yours and always will be. "Morning," I said. "Y'all mind telling me what the hell you're doing on private land at 5:14 in the blessed AM?" Clipboard man didn't blink when I confronted him. He stepped forward like a man trying hard to look taller than his shadow. "I'm Officer Nelson," he declared. "Community Inspection Patrol. We're here for a code compliance assessment." I let the words hang in the cold air. "Code compliance?" I raised an eyebrow. "Son, the nearest HOA is 3 miles west. This here is unincorporated land. You don't have authority over a fence post out here." He didn't flinch, just gestured at my wooden perimeter fence. "This fence obstructs emergency visibility," he said, tapping his clipboard. "And your livestock containment fails secondary safety standards." "My dogs have better safety standards than you three," I said, "and they don't need containment. They need freedom." Sunglasses guy whispered into a walkie-talkie. Static answered back. The third man kept taking photos like he was valuing my property for auction. And that was enough. I pulled the gate remote from my vest and pressed the button. Down the road, my steel gate slid shut with a thunderous K chunk, echoing across the morning haze like the slam of a prison door. Clipboard Nelson spun around. That's when Sunglasses Guy said the dumbest thing he could have said. "You ready for this?" I almost laughed. Born ready. If they wanted a showdown, I wasn't about to disappoint them. I keyed my radio. Dan, it's Hayward. 3 unknown males, unmarked van, fake gear. Gates locked. Sheriff Daniels responded immediately. Copy, 20 minutes. Stay clear. The men exchanged looks, fear sneaking in through the seams of their cheap tactical vests. Nelson insisted. We need to leave. This is a municipal vehicle. I waved him off. Nothing municipal about a cargo van with stickers. I turned toward my heavy-duty UTV, the diesel farm model with a built-in winch, something designed for work, not show. And that's when trouble doubled down. One of the trespassers panicked and bolted toward the side fence. The other 2 followed like spooked cattle. They slammed into an old cedar post. Snap, breaking the fence wide open. My 8-week-old calf, Sarge, startled awake and tried to run, but the collapsing wire wrapped around his leg. He let out a sound that no rancher ever wants to hear, a sharp, scared bleat of pure pain. I froze for half a second. My jaw tightened until it hurt. And here's the truth I rarely say out loud. I wanted to run to Sarge right then, but a man who leaves danger standing just breeds more of it. First, I had to put the wolves in a cage. Then I'd tend to the calf. My anger wasn't hot. It was cold, sharp, focused. I climbed into the UTV, turned the key, and the diesel engine roared awake like a waking beast. I rolled toward the van while the 3 imposters shouted behind me. I didn't answer. Instead, I backed the UTV up to the van's front bumper, jumped off, and grabbed my steel tow cable. Thick, scarred, reliable. I wrapped it around the axle and hooked it in. Nelson yelled, "You can't do that! That's illegal detainment!" I didn't look at him. "Nope," I said. "This is called preserving evidence. Don't want your municipal vehicle driving off before the sheriff arrives." I got back in the UTV, gave it throttle. The engine growled deep, tires slipping on the gravel before catching grip. Whump! The cable went tight, and the van lurched sideways. The 3 men stumbled backward in complete panic. One tripped over his boots. Another yelled something about civil rights. Too late. I kept a steady pull, dragging that white van 50 yards across my lot. The heavy-duty UTV strained, engine rumbling, gravel spraying, dust flying, metal groaned like an old barn door. The van slid right into the open steel barn. I hopped down, unhooked the cable, and with both hands rolled the barn door shut. Slam! Dropped the iron bolt, locked, evidence secured. Sunglasses, guy's face was red enough to scare a bull. You're insane. This is obstruction of a civic operation. I walked up just close enough for my drone to capture every detail. Unless you boys show badges and warrants, I said, you're just trespassers who woke up on the wrong ranch. Behind me, through the broken fence, I saw Sarge limping, tangled wire still wrapped around him. I didn't feel anger this time, just calculation. A quiet certainty about exactly what needed to happen next, and how far I was willing to go to make it stick. The sun was rising over the ridge, painting the hills gold, but the air between me and those 3 men was cold as forged steel, and they finally realized they had started something they weren't ready to finish. I was crouched beside Sarge, cutting the last loop of wire off his leg, when I heard familiar tires on gravel. A slow, steady rumble that meant law, not trouble. Sheriff Daniels' cruiser rolled to a stop. He stepped out the same way he handled everything in life. Calm, deliberate, nothing wasted. "Morning, Hayward," he said. "Morning, Sheriff." His eyes swept the scene. Broken fence, 3 men standing pale and stiff, and the barn door with a fresh scratch where the van slid in. Then he looked at me. "Why is there a vehicle locked in your barn, son?" I stood up, dusted hay off my knees. "Securing the scene of the crime, Sheriff. Didn't want the evidence to drive away." He didn't smile. He just nodded, once. A simple acknowledgement between men who'd known each other long enough. "Walk me through it." I told him everything from the fake inspection patrol to the fence break and Sarge's injury. Sheriff's jaw clenched when I pointed at the calf. Clipboard Nelson tried his luck. "Sheriff, this man unlawfully detained us. We're with Ridge Pines Community Oversight Division." Sheriff slowly turned his head. "Authorized by who?" "Our HOA board." Sheriff jabbed a finger west. "That HOA is 3 miles that direction. This here is unincorporated ranch land." Nelson swallowed. "But our operational map—" "Son," Sheriff said, voice flat as a hammer on steel, "that map ain't worth a sack of chicken feed in this county." Before Nelson could stutter again, A new sound rolled in behind us. A deep, expensive engine growl. Not farm deep, not diesel work deep. This was money deep. We all turned. A Ford F-250 Platinum eased up the driveway, sun gleaming off the chrome like it was afraid of dirt. The tires were so clean they looked hand-polished. Driver's door opened. Out stepped Brian Dalworth, pressed white shirt. Boots too new, smile too polite, danger wearing a gentleman's face. He walked toward Sheriff first. Of course he did. "Sheriff Daniels," Brian said warmly, offering a hand. "I came as soon as I heard there was confusion." Sheriff didn't shake the hand. "What are you doing here, Brian?" "Oh, just ensuring our community partners are treated fairly." He flashed a sympathetic smile at the cuffed men, then turned to me. And that smile changed. Softer, but sharper, like a scalpel wrapped in velvet. "Mr. Hayward?" He nodded slowly. "As stubborn as they said." I didn't answer. Brian opened a leather folio and pulled out several documents. Thick, fancy paper, embossed seals. He handed them to Sheriff with the confidence of a man placing a winning hand on a poker table. "Temporary jurisdiction overlay," he explained. "Ridgepine HOA has been granted emergency enforcement powers extending here." He pointed at my land. Sheriff flipped through the pages. Didn't even take 10 seconds. Then he closed the folder, handed it back, and said, "Brian, these ain't legal documents." Brian blinked. Sheriff added, "These ain't even good fakes." A faint crack appeared in Brian's smile. "Sheriff, maybe you don't understand the long-term planning Ridgepine is pursuing. This land sits on an essential access corridor for—" "This land," Sheriff said, cutting him off, "ain't in your jurisdiction, your plans, your fantasies, or your spreadsheets." Brian's smile finally dropped. He looked at me now, directly. No politeness, no mask, just a cold, assessing glare. The voice he used with me wasn't the one he used with Sheriff. "You're in the way, Hayward." I stepped forward once. "So, move." Brian didn't flinch. He just straightened his shirt sleeves like he was brushing off dirt that wasn't there. "Sheriff," he said, switching back to polite mode, "I'll have my attorney contact your office. And his." He jerked his chin at me. "There will be consequences." Sheriff folded his arms. "The only consequences today are for your boys. Turn around." Sunglasses. Guy shouted, "You can't arrest us! Brian, tell him!" But Brian didn't speak, didn't defend them, didn't lift a finger. He just walked back to his spotless F-250, opened the door, and said one thing before he climbed in. "This isn't over, Mr. Hayward. You just made yourself a problem." Then he drove off, slow, smooth, certain of something only he understood. Sheriff watched the truck disappear. Then he said, quietly, "Hayward, that man's trouble dressed like Sunday church." I nodded. "I figured. You want me to dig?" he asked. "I want to know who thinks my land's up for grabs." Sheriff gave a grim half-smile. "Then we'll dig." Sheriff Daniels rolled off my property with the 3 cuffed idiots loaded in the back, and the dust from his tires hadn't even settled before the silence came down like a heavy blanket. Not peaceful silence, the kind that hangs after trouble leaves. And right before more trouble shows up, I walked back toward the small pen where I'd laid Sarge, the little calf breathing fast through pain he didn't deserve. His leg was swollen, the bandage already spotting with blood. My 2 retired canine shepherds sat close by, ears forward, eyes tracking every twitch of the poor animal. They didn't bark, they didn't growl. They just watched with that quiet vigilance working dogs have when they know something's wrong. I checked my watch. The local vet, Dr. Wallace, should have been halfway here by now. Sure enough, a silver Tacoma kicked up dust on the road moments later. Wallace stepped out carrying his worn leather bag, the same one he'd used when he pulled calves on my father's ranch 20 years ago. "Where's the patient?" he asked. I led him over. He knelt, ran his hands gently along Sarge's leg, pressed lightly, then frowned, deeply. "Damn shame," he muttered. "Wire cuts, tendon stress, bruising clear up to the hip." He looked up at me. "This wasn't an accident." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't." Sarge let out a soft cry when Wallace rotated the leg. The sound went straight through me like a nail. Wallace sighed. "I can treat him, bandage, antibiotics, anti-inflammatory, but he'll be limping for months, maybe longer. Fall breeding season, you can forget that." I nodded once. I'd expected it, but hearing it confirmed by someone who knew hit harder than I liked. Wallace scribbled something on his pad, tore the sheet, and handed it over. 18,030. Itemized, clear, final. He gave me a sympathetic look. I'll check on him in a week. When he left, I stood there a moment longer. The sun was fully up now, throwing long golden stripes across the pasture, but it didn't warm a damn thing in me. I wasn't angry, not hot angry, just hollow, like someone had carved out a piece of me and left cold iron in its place. I walked back toward the house, boots crunching over gravel, and that's when I saw the courier truck parked at my gate. The driver, kid in his 20s, held a clipboard and a thick envelope sealed with a blue and gold emblem. Delivery for a Mr. Hayward? That'd be me. He handed it over, had me sign, then got back in his truck and drove off like he didn't want to breathe the same air as trouble. I looked at the envelope. Law offices of Garrettson and Pike, representing Rio Vista Hills HOA. Figures. I tore it open, right there at the gate. Inside, 9 pages of legal jargon, dressed up to look official, but the heart of it was simple. They were suing me. Accusations. Unlawful detainment of community property, hostile escalation, threatening behavior toward unarmed civic personnel, obstruction of community compliance activities. I let out a laugh. A real one, short, sharp, dry as West Texas dust. There it was, just like Sheriff said, papers. And papers cut deep. I folded the stack, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. The dogs followed me as I walked to the fence line. Slow, measured steps along the boundary my father and grandfather had set long before Ridgepine or Rio Vista Hills was even a thought. For a moment, it was just me, the wind, and the faint, pained bleat of Sarge from the barn, and I understood something clear as a rifle shot. This wasn't about a van. This wasn't about codes or ordinances or neighborly inspections. This was about pressure, money, and someone thinking they could use the law to pry open what they failed to take by force. I stopped at the fence post, rested my hand on the worn wood. Across the pasture, the air shimmered with heat already rising off the dirt. Things were rearranging themselves, lines being drawn, battles picking their ground. I whispered, "All right, Brian, you want to fight on paper? We can bleed ink just fine." The words hung in the air, heavy, certain, but this time, I didn't just let them echo in my head. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed through contacts until I hit the name I needed. Vince Calder. The phone barely rang once. "Hayward?" he answered. "Yeah," I said, eyes on the pasture. "It's starting." A beat of silence, not confusion, recognition. "What do you need?" Vince asked. I watched a hawk circle high above the ridgeline, drifting lazy loops in the warming air. "Boots on the ground," I said, "and quiet eyes." Vince exhaled, a soft chuckle in his voice. "Knew this day was coming. I'll be there by the weekend." I hung up, slipped the phone back in my pocket, and for the first time since sunrise, the tightness in my chest eased, just a hair, because now the fight wasn't happening to me anymore. Now it was happening from me. 2:02 a.m. The kind of hour where the world holds its breath. No wind, no crickets, just the hum of a distant transformer somewhere out near Highway 118. I wasn't asleep. Men like me, out here, we don't sleep much once the fight starts. I was sitting at the kitchen table, boots on, shirt still dusty from the evening's hell. The house was dark except for the weak glow of the stove clock. 2:02 a.m. That's when I felt it. My dogs lifted their heads at the exact same second I did. Not barking, no, just alert, bodies stiff, eyes locked toward the front door. Something was outside. I reached over and quietly set my hand on Rowdy's shoulder. He didn't growl, didn't make a sound. That was worse. A silent dog is a dog that senses real danger. I stood up and moved toward the window, barely breathed as I pulled the curtain back a fraction. A white SUV sat off the road, no headlights, no movement. Just a dark shape with two faint parking lights glowing, like a pair of eyes watching my house. My jaw tightened. I slipped my hand into my pocket, instinctively checking the burner phone I'd confiscated earlier from the van. It was there, cold, dead, off. I stepped out onto the porch. My dog stayed behind me, shoulders tense, waiting for my command. The night felt thick, like the air itself was warning me. That's when I heard it. A rustle, soft, but too heavy to be the wind, coming from the fence line. I raised the flashlight in my left hand, clicked it on, and there it was, lying in the dirt just inside my property. A chunk of raw hamburger, still pink, still wet, still warm. A rock sat on top to keep it from rolling. My stomach sank. I knelt down and brought the light closer, just enough to see the dusted powder clinging to the meat. Bright blue crystals, rat poison, industrial grade. One mouthful of that would drop a grown coyote in minutes. My dogs weren't supposed to survive tonight. Neither was Sarge if he'd made it to the fence line. They wanted to break me by killing what I loved most. My grip tightened around the flashlight. I stood, slow, deliberate, my eyes never leaving the SUV parked out there in the dark. And that's when it happened. A violent buzz against my thigh. I froze. The burner phone in my pocket, the one I had taken from the van, was vibrating like a trapped insect. I pulled it out. The screen lit my face in cold blue. 2:17 a.m. Incoming call, unknown number. I answered. A man's voice bled through the line, smooth, smug, oily. "Mr. Hayward, you're making this harder than it needs to be." My blood pressure didn't spike. My pulse didn't jump. No. Something inside me just clicked into place. Calm, sharp, surgical. I looked out across the night, right at that SUV. "You boys crossed a line tonight," I said quietly. Dead quiet. A breath on the other end. A half chuckle. "There's more coming if you don't cooperate." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because the fight had officially changed. This wasn't trespassing anymore. Wasn't nuisance. Wasn't some HOA wannabe power play. This was warfare. Cowards' warfare. Poison, fear, darkness. I ended the call. Slipped the phone back into my pocket. The SUV's parking lights turned off. Then the engine started. Soft, controlled. It backed away slowly, disappearing into the black desert. I stood alone in the yard, the poisoned meat at my feet, the night closing back in. And right then, I knew the next move wasn't theirs. It was mine. Dawn didn't break so much as creep across the desert that morning. The night had been long, too long, and the taste of frozen meat and threats still clung to the back of my throat. But I wasn't tired. Men like me stop feeling tired once the war drums start beating. By 6:12 a.m., I had the coffee on, the dogs fed and watched, and the poisoned meat sealed in a freezer bag for evidence. I was standing at the sink when I heard it. Crunch, gravel, heavy tires. Not the light skip of a sedan. This was something built with steel and purpose. I walked to the porch. A black Chevy Tahoe rolled up the drive, its windows dusted from a long trip, antenna bouncing on the roof like a curious finger. The engine shut off. A moment later, the door swung open. Vince Calder stepped out. Same old bastard. 6'2", shoulders like a damn bull moose, jaw rough with stubble, jeans, boots, leather jacket. Not a single piece of him looked like he'd ever worn a tie. He shut the door with his boot, looked at me, and grinned that half grin he only used when things were bad. Really bad. "Morning, Hayward." I crossed my arms. "You're early." He shrugged. "You called." That was Vince. Never asked what's wrong, never asked, "Are you okay?" He just showed up, always had. We shook hands, forearms tight. He sniffed the air, eyes shifting toward the barn, the broken fence, the ground. "You had visitors." "Yeah," I said. 3 of them last night, and one more parked out there at 2 in the damn morning. Vince's eyes narrowed. "Brian's men?" "Feels like him." He nodded, slow, deliberate. "All right," he said. "Let's get inside. I've got things you need to see." Inside the kitchen, Vince let a thick folder hit my table with a heavy thud. It landed with a kind of weight only trouble carries. "You've been busy," I said. He smirked. "You have no idea." The first thing he pulled out was a slim digital recorder. "Audio file," he said. "Recorded inside a private HOA board meeting last Thursday." He pressed play. Brian's voice flooded the kitchen. Cold, arrogant, dripping entitlement. "Hayward's land is leverage. He caves, the whole ridge flips. And when he's out, we turn those parcels into premium view lots. Tricor gets their cut, we get ours. Simple math." Then came Brian's laugh, sharp, greedy, cruel. My fingertips pressed into the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks. Vince paused the recording. That's the first nail in his coffin. Next came printed spreadsheets, wire transfers with highlighted entries. $86,000, Vince said. Money routed from HOA reserves into Tricor Consulting, a shell company run by Brian's brother-in-law. Kickbacks, I muttered. Kickbacks, he echoed, as clear as a summer sky. He wasn't finished. He unfolded an oversized print of a county GIS map. The property lines had been shifted. Subtly, surgically, but unmistakably. This, Vince said, tapping it, is a forged GIS layer, pulled off a drive belonging to Stratwell Urban Group. Guess who hired them? Brian? Brian, he confirmed. They had digitally redrawn my land as if it belonged to the HOA, a high-tech land grab. Vince leaned back in his chair. And guess what else? This one's already in the hands of a friend of mine. I narrowed my eyes. Who? His grin widened. Angela Wilkins, the journalist, the one who had taken down a corrupt county commissioner with a single front-page spread. Angela says this isn't just about your ranch, Vince continued. She thinks this is a network. Says Brian's been building himself a shadow empire for years. Your land's just the last missing piece. I stared at everything laid across the table. The audio, the forged maps, the money trail, piece by piece. The truth sharpened. Brian wasn't harassing me. He was building a damn empire, and my ranch stood right in the way of his crown. Vince leaned forward, voice dropping into a low growl. Hayward, we're not just gonna win this. We're gonna peel that son of a bitch like a pecan. I met his eyes. For the first time since this mess began, something solid settled inside me. Not hope, resolve. I nodded once. All right, I said. What's our next step? Vince's grin turned wicked. Oh, you're gonna love this part. And that was when the real war began. The desert was warming up, but the kitchen still held the cool breath of dawn. Vince leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying me the way a mechanic studies an engine before tearing it apart. Well, he said, you've taken enough hits. Time to throw a few back. I nodded. Where do we start? Vince reached into his jacket and pulled out a smaller, cleaner folder, this one organized, labeled, and clipped with the kind of precision only a man who'd seen too much chaos tends to keep. First thing, he said, is we go legal. I gave him a sideways look. Brian's got lawyers stacked like cordwood. Yeah, Vince replied, but he doesn't have truth. He doesn't have proof. You do. He tapped the folder. This is a cease and desist, drafted by a friend of mine, Elena Cortez, former JAG. She doesn't blink, she doesn't bluff, and she sure as hell doesn't lose. We hit Brian with it today, certified mail. Sheriff office gets a copy too. I raised an eyebrow. You brought the paperwork before asking me? He smirked. I knew damn well you'd sign it. He wasn't wrong. I flipped through the documents, clean, sharp language accusing Brian and the Rio Vista Hills HOA of coordinated fraud, trespass, forgery, harassment, surveillance, and malicious intent. It felt good, felt real good. Vince continued. Second thing, we gather every shred of evidence you've got. Videos, photos, vet bill, the poisoned meat, timestamps from last night, the burner phone logs. Angela wants it all. I frowned. You really trust her? With this? Vince asked. Hell yes. She lives for blood trails like Brian's. He stood up and walked toward the living room window, parting the blinds with 2 fingers. What? I asked. He grunted. You're being watched. Sure enough, high on the ridge, a reflection flashed, like sun bouncing off glass. Spotter scope, camera lens, maybe binoculars. Brian's rattled, Vince said. He knows you've got his men. He knows the sheriff's involved. He's scared you'll talk. That makes him stupid. And dangerous, I added. Oh, extremely. He closed the blinds. Which brings us to step 3. I waited. Vince cracked his knuckles, a smile tugging at his mouth. We take this public. I blinked slowly. Public? County public, press public, social media public, HOA residents public. I shook my head. Vince, you know damn well I don't do cameras. I don't do interviews. I've lived alone 15 years. Yeah, he cut in. And look how well that's worked out. He wasn't wrong. The HOA had come for me anyway, quiet or not, polite or not, invisible or not. Silence wasn't protection anymore. It was fuel for men like Brian. Vince lowered his voice. Hayward, listen. This isn't just about you. Angela says Brian's scheme lines up with 2 other subdivisions in the county, same shell company, Same forged GIS maps, same pattern of pushing out older landowners. You put light on this? You won't just save your ranch, you'll blow the lid off his whole racket. I leaned on the counter, staring out at the pasture, Sarge hobbling gently near the gate, but standing, thank God. What exactly do you want me to do? Vince grinned. Simple. Tell your story. I snorted. Not my style, he shrugged. Not your style to get shot at either, but here we are. He wasn't wrong. Before I could respond, he walked to the table, spread out the forged GIS map, the money trail, and the audio recorder. The way I see it, Vince said, Brian has two possible reactions once we hit him with the cease and desist. One, he backs off and tries to cover his tracks. Two, he pointed out the window, he doubles down and does something stupid. I sighed. Feels like he's stuck on stupid already. Exactly, Vince exhaled. And stupid men cornered by truth? They escalate. He tapped the recorder. This audio alone is enough to make a DA drool, but we'll need more. We'll need a timeline. We'll need documented threats. He looked me dead in the eyes. And we'll need you steady. I'm steady, I said. You better be, he replied, because Brian's about to push harder. Dirty tricks, false reports. Maybe someone anonymous files an environmental complaint. He'll try to bury you under paperwork. That's why Elena's here, I said, signing the cease and desist. And why you're here, he nodded slowly. Yeah, but I'm also here for one more reason. I looked up. He hesitated for the first time all morning. Angela wants an interview, not for publishing, not yet. She wants context. Wants to understand why this ranch is the line Brian can't cross. I swallowed once, hard. Old memories flickered. My wife, the wildfire, the promise I made out loud to empty land and open sky. I looked at Vince. She'll have her interview, he slapped the table. Good, then we're moving. He gathered the files, stacked them tight. You ready to hit Brian where it hurts? I felt my jaw set. Born ready, he smirked. You stole his line. No, I said quietly. He stole it from me. Vince laughed. Then the dogs barked outside. Deep, alert, warning. Vince and I both stepped to the porch. Up on the ridge, the same black SUV rolled forward, slow and deliberate, like it wanted to be seen, not hiding anymore, not spying, declaring itself. I looked at Vince. Looks like step 3 just moved up to step now. He cracked his knuckles. Good. I was getting bored anyway. And just like that, the counterattack truly began. I don't dress up much, but for that morning I did. Fresh shirt, clean hat, coffee blacker than coal, and a cold, steady anger walking beside me like a loyal dog. The Brewster County Courthouse rose out of the desert like an old stone sentinel. Inside, the air was chilled. Not the mercy kind of cold, but the courtroom kind. The kind that strips men down to the truth. Elena Cortez was already waiting. Ex-JAG Corps, sharp as a scalpel, hair tied back, boots polished enough to blind a man. You ready? She asked. I smirked. Born ready. We stepped into courtroom B. Brian Dalworth was already there. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect arrogance dripping off him like perfume. His fake patrol sat 2 rows behind him, stiff and uncomfortable in borrowed dress shirts. They looked like 3 boys dragged to church after stealing from the communion box. The bailiff called for order. Judge Marianne Finn entered. 62, eyes like steel fence posts, and a reputation for making liars regret learning to speak. All rise. We sat. Brian's attorney strutted up first, all confidence and cologne. Your Honor, my client brings forth a complaint of unlawful impoundment, hostile escalation, and... Judge Finn lifted a hand. Do you have the mutual aid enforcement agreement? Yes, Your Honor, signed and authorized. He presented the laminated sheet like a magician revealing his final card. The judge pulled her glasses low, squinted, frowned, and then frowned harder. This signature, she said, tapping the page, belongs to Inspector Harold Pruitt. Yes, Your Honor. He retired in 20. Silence cracked across the room. Brian's smile collapsed. The attorney stammered. This is the document presented to us by whom? She snapped. Brian swallowed. Your Honor, No, she cut in. You brought falsified documents into my courtroom. Your complaint is dismissed, with prejudice. She slammed the memo down. Brian's eyes actually trembled. Elena rose smoothly. Your Honor, with permission, we will proceed with our counterclaims. Proceed. Elena called her first witness. Vince Calder walked in. Broad shoulders, leather jacket, jaw like a brick wall. He sat, took the oath, leaned into the microphone like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Mr. Calder," Elena said, "tell the court what you found." He held up a small recorder. "This is audio from a closed-door HOA board meeting. Obtained legally." He pressed play. Brian's voice filled the courtroom. "We're not enforcing codes. We're establishing leverage. Hayward's land is worth 7 figures if we flip it. If he won't cooperate, we freeze him out and make the land unusable." A woman in the gallery gasped. One of the patrolmen dropped his gaze to his shoes. Elena nodded. "And what else did you uncover?" Vince opened a folder, the thick one he'd dropped onto my kitchen table the morning he arrived. "Financial logs," he said. 86,000 of HOA money funneled into Tricor Consulting. Tricor is run by Mr. Dalworth's brother-in-law. Judge Finn's mouth tightened. She didn't interrupt. She just stared at Brian like she was measuring the length of the hole he was digging. "And this," Vince continued, "is a forged GIS parcel update, submitted by Stratwell Urban Group on behalf of the HOA. He held up a large print. "My land," painted in soft green shading, labeled Compliance Review Zone. Exactly what I showed Vince at my kitchen table. "And this," he said, pulling the next page, "is an image from Mr. Hayward's veterinary assessment." He handed the judge a photo. Sarge, my calf, a wrap on his leg, blood and fur matted, a printed vet bill for $18,043.67 clipped to the top. Vince didn't sugarcoat it. One of Dalworth's men knocked down a fence while trespassing. The calf panicked, ran into barbed wire, permanent damage to the tendon. The judge stared at the photo for several seconds. Her face changed, not into pity, not sorrow, anger, controlled, judicial anger. She placed the photo down gently, too gently. Then she slammed her gavel hard. "This is organized misconduct," she barked. "And it ends today." She turned to the bailiff. "Lock the doors." A wave of shock went through the room. The bailiff obeyed, heavy metal bolts sliding into place, echoing like a jail cell. Brian rose abruptly. "Your Honor, I object. I had no knowledge. I didn't order." "Sit down, Mr. Dalworth," Judge Finn ordered. "You are not leaving this courtroom until the sheriff's office arrives to take your statement." Brian sat, slowly, face white, hands trembling. Elena stepped forward one last time. "Your Honor, we request immediate suspension of the HOA board, seizure of all financial records, and a protective order for my client." "Granted," Judge Finn said without hesitation. "All of it," she pointed at Brian, "and Mr. Dalworth. I strongly advise you to remain silent until you have criminal counsel present." Brian finally looked my way, not with arrogance, not with confidence, but with the eyes of a man realizing the ground beneath him just vanished. Vince and I walked past him on our way out. Vince didn't whisper this time. He said it loud enough for the whole damn room. 7 figures, huh? Looks like you overpriced yourself, Brian." Outside, the heat hit me like a hammer. 105 degrees. Sun blazing, but the air felt different. Some battles you win with grit, some with guns, some with barbed wire and cattle gates, and some, in rooms like that, with truth sharpened into a blade. Brian Dalworth had swung first, but today the blade swung back. The desert has a way of carrying news farther than the wind. And after that courtroom door slammed shut behind Brian Dalworth, the whole county seemed to inhale, and then exhale all at once. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like the start of the avalanche. I woke up the next morning stiff from the long day, poured myself a black coffee, and stepped onto the porch just as the sunrise cracked open across the ridge. For the first time in weeks, no strange vehicles lingered on the horizon. No headlights crawling along the fence line. No poisoned bait in the dirt. Just quiet. Honest quiet. But the world outside my gate, it was burning. By 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed non-stop. Farmgate Mutual, the HOA's insurer, had made their move. Karen, my insurance agent, didn't even bother with small talk. "They're pulling coverage," she said. "Effective immediately. Liability, property, directors, gone." I set my coffee down. "That quick?" "They watched the court video, the forged maps, the audio. They're not touching this with a 10-foot pole. What happens to an HOA with no insurance?" Her voice softened, but not kindly. "It dies, Mr. Hayward. She hung up. I could almost hear Brian screaming from his detention cell. By midday, the subdivision started coming apart like a cheap saddle seam. Emails leaked. Screenshots spread across Facebook groups faster than a summer brush fire. 3 board members resigned before lunch. 2 more that afternoon. Neighbors who once strutted along their sidewalks counting fence pickets were now knocking on doors whispering, "We didn't know. We didn't know." Maybe they didn't know Brian was forging maps, but they damn sure knew he was rotten. Now they were tasting the rot themselves, and they were furious. Just after sunset, Kenny called me. Soft-spoken guy, but even over the phone his breath was shaky. "They're holding an emergency meeting at the school gym," he said. "You ought to come. Folks want to hear from you." So, I went. The gym was already packed when I walked in. Rows of metal chairs, echoey lights, old basketball hoops hanging overhead. People stood along the walls, arms crossed tight, faces pale with worry. Fear is contagious, but so is truth. I didn't plan on giving a speech. I never liked that sort of thing. But when they opened the floor, Kenny nudged me forward. I walked up, plugged my flash drive into the projector, and stepped aside. No talking. Not one word. The room went silent as the screen lit up. First clip, drone footage of Brian's fake patrol trespassing on my land. Laser measuring my fence like they were prepping a raid. Murmurs. Gasps. Second, still frames of Sarge, my calf, his leg torn from the barbed wire they knocked down. Vet diagnosis. Treatment costs. Permanent damage. A woman in the front row put a hand over her mouth. Third, the forged GIS map, my property shaded in green, labeled Compliance Review Zone, a lie drawn in pixels. Fourth, financial logs, $86,000 to Tricor Consulting, run by Brian's brother-in-law. And fifth, Brian's own voice from the secret recording. "Absorb Hayward or remove him. That land is the linchpin." Silence. The kind of silence that comes right before a storm breaks. Then an older woman stood up, hair silver, eyes sharp, voice louder than the entire gym. "I move," she said, "to dissolve the Rio Vista Hills Board of Directors, effective immediately." Another voice from the back shouted, "Second!" Hands shot up everywhere. 70% approval. And just like that, Brian's castle fell without him even standing in front of it. The next morning, Vince texted me one line. Stratwell folded. Turns out, the development firm behind the forged map yanked their big project, Vista Arroyo, right off the county agenda. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Later, Vince told me 3 investors pulled out after seeing Angela's early report online. Turns out HOA corruption doesn't look good in a portfolio. Speaking of Angela, 2 days after the hearing, she hit publish. Her headline burned across the state. "The Fake Patrol of Rio Vista Hills, How an HOA Tried to Steal a Texas Ranch." She wore denim, boots, and an attitude that said she'd been waiting her whole life to expose a snake like Brian. The story went viral. Locals shared it, ranchers shared it, veterans shared it, even a retired judge from Lubbock reposted it with, "Finally, someone said it." My phone lit up with messages from folks across Texas and beyond. I thought I was the only one. "Our HOA's been pulling this crap for years. Thank you for fighting. Truth spreads faster than fear when you give it enough light." And then came the final collapse. All afternoon, sheriff's cruisers rolled through Rio Vista Hills like cowhands driving cattle. 3 deputies walked into the HOA office carrying evidence boxes. One deputy came out holding a stack of patrol uniforms in a clear bag. Another held the laminated fake memo like it was toxic waste. I heard from neighbors that the office safe was seized, computers too, bank accounts frozen pending full audit. By sunset, the HOA was a skeleton with no muscle, no money, no leadership, and no future. A whole community once obsessed with mailbox paint shades was suddenly staring at lawsuits, criminal investigations, and insurance loss. And Brian? He sat in a detention cell waiting for formal charges. No empire, no minions, no power, just 4 gray walls and time to think. That night, as I stood on my porch with a mug of warm coffee, the desert was quiet again. Not the chilling quiet of danger, not the tense quiet of waiting, just quiet. A few months earlier, I was the one under siege, surrounded, pressured, painted as a threat. Now, their empire had cracked, then buckled, then collapsed into dust, all without a single shot fired. Funny thing about justice, it ain't quick, it ain't loud, but when it arrives, it hits like thunder rolling off a canyon wall. I took a breath of the cool desert air. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had changed. Brian Dalworth wasn't coming after me anymore. Now the law was coming after him. And the next time he saw daylight, it would be through bars. They came for Brian at dawn. Not the quiet kind of dawn, the soft blue light that kisses the tops of mesquite trees. No, this was the cold gray kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. I was in the barn tossing hay when Vince's text buzzed through. "Turn on channel 7, now." I wiped my hands on my jeans, stepped into the kitchen, and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered, and there he was. Brian Dalworth, still wearing yesterday's suit jacket, hair matted on one side like he'd slept on a concrete bench. 2 deputies flanked him as they walked him out at the side door of the county jail toward a waiting cruiser. Reporters swarmed like flies on a carcass. Microphones jabbed toward him. Cameras clicked. Someone shouted, "Brian, is it true the DA added new charges?" Another yelled, "Did you falsify the GIS boundaries yourself?" A third, "Did you order the poisoning incident?" Brian tried to speak over the noise, his voice cracked and frantic. "This is a misunderstanding. My attorneys will... I've done nothing Deputy Carson tightened his grip on Brian's arm. "Sir, keep moving." The camera zoomed in. Brian's eyes weren't angry now. They weren't smug. They weren't superior. They were scared. Small, feral. For the first time since this whole mess started, the predator finally looked like prey. And damn if that didn't feel like justice. The DA held a press briefing 30 minutes later. I watched with my arms folded, leaning against the counter. District Attorney Morales stepped up to the podium, her voice steady as bedrock. Based on evidence submitted by investigators, including forged county records, fraudulent mapping overlays, coordinated harassment, misuse of HOA funds, and conspiracy to commit unlawful land acquisition, Brian Allen Dalworth is being charged with 8 felony counts. Cameras flashed like lightning. She continued, "He is considered a flight risk due to his financial resources and prior attempts to conceal key documents. The state requests no bail." The room erupted. No bail, no freedom. No more hiding behind lawyers and polished boots and fake authority. Morales stepped aside, and reporters shouted questions, but I had already muted the TV. I didn't need to hear more. The law had finally sunk its teeth in. By late morning, Sheriff Daniels's truck rumbled down my driveway. He parked beside the barn, stepped out, and dusted off his hat. He didn't walk with urgency or tension. His boots moved slow, deliberate, like a man carrying news that needed to be delivered face to face. I met him halfway. He sighed. "It's official, Hayward. Judge signed the warrant. Dalworth's not going anywhere for a long while." I nodded once. "And the rest of his crew?" "Some lawyered up. Some flipped quick as minnows. Tricor Consulting's accounts are frozen. DA's draining the swamp from the top down." He paused, thumb hooking into his belt, expression softening just a bit. "You did good bringing this to us. Damn good." I shook my head. "I didn't do it alone." He smirked. "Yeah, that PI of yours, Calder, man's sharper than a boot spur." Then more serious. "For what it's worth, Hayward, you were right to fight. Men like Brian, they count on folks giving up. You didn't." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Some victories don't taste sweet. They taste like iron. But iron's what holds fences upright. Iron's what keeps land safe. That afternoon, I saddled up and rode out to the western fence line where Sarge had been hurt. He was grazing nearby, bandage leg healing cleanly, moving steadier than he had in days. I rested a hand on his neck. "See that boy?" I murmured. Storm's breaking. Wind drifted across the pasture, warm and clean. The land felt lighter, like something rotten had been dug up and thrown out where it belonged, like home again. Just before sunset, Angela called me. "You watching the news?" she asked. "Yeah, saw it." "Good, because this isn't just local anymore. My piece hit national syndication an hour ago. People are talking. Lawmakers, ranchers, folks who've been steamrolled by their HOAs for years. This story has teeth." I couldn't help a small grin. "Glad it's biting back." "Oh, it is," she said. And Brian? He's the first of many. The call ended, and I stepped outside. The sky was turning gold, streaks of orange slicing through the fading blue. One of those sunsets that reminds you the world's bigger than one man's greed. I leaned on the porch railing. For weeks, Brian tried to cage me, to box me in with fake maps, fake patrols, fake authority. And now, he was the one behind bars. The reckoning had come full circle. As stars began to pierce the dusk, I whispered to no one in particular, "Let this be the last man who thinks he can steal what ain't his." The desert answered with silence. The week after Brian's arrest felt like the land itself was finally letting out a long, tired breath. Morning light settled soft on the mesquite. No strange engines, no headlights lingering on distant hills, just the wind and the old familiar creak of the porch boards under my boots. I spent that morning repairing the section of fence those bastards tore down. The sun was barely waking, throwing long gold shadows across the dirt. No rush, no fear, just a man putting his land back in order. Sarge limped over, stubborn as ever, bandaged but alive. He pressed his head into my hip like he was checking if the world was safe again. "Yeah, boy," I murmured, rubbing the warm spot between his ears. We held the damn line. Right then, a dust cloud rose from the county road. A white Ford slowed to a stop at my gate. Not HOA, not trouble. Just Sheriff Daniels, uniform crisp, toothpick in his mouth, holding an envelope thick enough to mean something. He stepped out, handed it over without a word. Inside was a check. $212,000, signed, sealed, court-ordered. Damages, restitution, vet bills, pain, fear, all paid back with interest. I held it for a second longer than I needed to. Not because I cared about the money, but because it meant they finally had to admit what they'd done. Sheriff tapped the brim of his hat. "That should fix every fence they broke," he said. "And buy a hell of a lot of new ones," I answered. He nodded toward the ranch. Acres of dust and sky and quiet that finally belonged to me again. "This land's yours, Hayward. Clean, clear, undisputed." "Always was," I said. By noon, my new steel warning sign was bolted to the front gate. Heavy gauge metal, black letters burned deep. Private land, no trespass, no HOA, no exceptions. It gleamed in the sun like a headstone for every lie they ever told. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the last orange light bleed across the horizon. My shotgun rested beside me, not because I expected trouble, but because it belonged there, the way some men keep a Bible or an old photograph close. Out by the barn, a gust of wind pushed through the slats, making the door hinges groan. And for a moment, just a moment, it sounded like a whisper from deep in the boards. "Born ready." I didn't smile, didn't swell with pride, just reached down, picked up the shotgun, and racked a shell with a slow, steady clack that echoed across the dirt. "I was always ready," I said softly. The land went quiet again, my land, and this time, that quiet belonged to me.